So I work at Red Hat. Basically, all day, all I do all day is work in Go, work on Kubernetes, work on Kompose, contribute a little bit to like Docker/Moby, same as Docker Compose. And basically, what I do is I work on the developer tools team, and I try and enhance the usage of like Kubernetes/OpenShift, just like containers in general at Red Hat. So my presentation is going from Docker Compose to Kubernetes and beyond. So if you don't know any of these, I think you're in the wrong place. Like, must know Docker. Some of you may have used Docker Compose just for like development, and of course, we're all here for Kubernetes. So the typical experience for a developer is that we start with Docker or Moby. So how in the world do I get started? You basically run this one command as just a plain old Jane example showing, OK, this is what I could do in a Docker container. I could have Nginx running in, I think they use Debian as a backend. I don't know. Or they use just the standard C binary and do it from Docker scratch, from build scratch. But anyways, this is the first example people usually show to how to run a Docker container. So what about PHP website? Basically, you run your database, MySQL, and then you run run Nginx. Of course, you have to pass in your HTML files, link in the database. So for this is a PHP application using Apache. So in order to communicate to the two, you spin up two Docker containers. Now, next is how do I make this easier? Like, I don't want to run these two random commands. I want to run it to like a nice little YAML file. So they made Docker Compose. So this new declarative format, basically, instead of having the commands, you have this neat little YAML file, and you're able to define all your services, like pass in, like, I don't know, your environment variables, in case you wanted to use a different environment variable file. Like, it's really cool for bringing up multiple containers at the same time. Of course, if you just want it running one container, that doesn't really matter. But like, for example, linking it, like you don't have to do that anymore because Docker Compose version 2 does it automatically. All these containers are able to communicate with each other. So they really simplified the format. So if you haven't used Docker Compose before, you literally just do Docker Compose up with that declarative YAML file, and boom, like you have a PHP application with MySQL database. OK, now what? Now what do I do? Oh, well, this is the only meme, I promise. I don't have anything else. So we have a lot of other container orchestrators. We basically, Docker Compose is a nice development way of testing your application. But what do we do now? Like, how do I go from development to production? Well, there's Kubernetes, OpenShift, Nomad, Mesos. They added Docker Swarm. Then they updated the Docker Compose format. Shipyard, Rancher. I think these now by Microsoft, they have Workflow. I think that runs on top of Kubernetes. I don't know. Even them might be a container orchestrator. Everybody wants their own now. But basically, we have Kubernetes. So because I'm at the Kubernetes meetup, I'm going to talk about Kubernetes. So why? I don't think I need to really explain why. There's a ton of stars. That's all what people care about nowadays. So it's robust. It was Borg before. Now it's open source. Don't really need to talk about that. But looking at Docker, if you remember Docker Compose, you could go, now we want to switch from this YAML file to all these Kubernetes artifacts. Like so many, I had to put it to like font 6 and squeeze them all in. How do I go from this to that? Well, we Skipbox created a tool. They are acquired by Bitnami. So they initially started it. There's some contributions from Google. What this basically is that it's a conversion tool going from that to all those Kubernetes artifacts. That's what I'm going to talk about. So basically, all you need to do is take that Compose file, run Compose up. We call it K-Compose because people really get confused between Docker Compose and this. And bam, you're there. So hopefully this works. because I had MiniCube set up and I did MiniCube delete before. So let's do the live demo. Okay, so just started. Hopefully everybody can see that. There we go. Just started MiniCube. You're not supposed to see that. But basically, I have an example Docker Compose file. This is the standard Google example, basically the go-to. It just uses a Redis slave master and uses the front end. It's the guestbook example, if you ever ran that before on Kubernetes. And I added this little thing right here, because that's one of the few things that we can't really convert from Docker Compose to Kubernetes. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but if you've used Docker Compose before, you're able to declare all your containers, like have your environment variables, opening all the ports, so this front end could communicate to it, and get a host from DNS, so this PHP application is able to find Redis and able to connect to it. So I'll start with the demo. So all you need to do is, I have Compose on my system. Side note, we just reached 1.0, woo. So I'm gonna run Compose up, and bam, it's already deployed to Kubernetes. So I'm gonna get the pods. All right, so it's now running. It created all the Kubernetes artifacts and in the background talked to Kubernetes via the API, and deployed it. So now I'm gonna do MiniCube service front end. Hopefully this works. All right, saw an error, but I think that's MiniCube. So now we have the guestbook example. This is usually the first example you run with Kubernetes. Enter foobar, all works. So, yep, like that's my ad block. Yeah, so there it is. So we can run Compose down now, and it will delete the service. Let's watch it get terminated. Okay, it's all terminating. So basically, all you need to do is run Compose up. But of course, if you want to actually get the artifacts, you would run Compose convert, and it'll create all the YAML files. Okay. And any questions? Am I moving a bit too fast? Okay. All right. Let's back to the slides. Oh, yeah.
Was here actually. My question is this gonna work with the Helm chart, or just gonna replace Helm chart, whatever?
We have compatibility with Helm, but like not really, because with Helm you have all those charts. You input your environment variables, and it goes from like this chart, which is sort of like a Kubernetes artifact, to like generating these Kubernetes artifacts. But it's good because it's like within the Kubernetes ecosystem. But no, I don't think this is to like replace Helm. This is basically to like get everyone to move from like Docker Compose / Swarm to Kubernetes, something more production worthy than Swarm. That's my opinion. Don't quote me on it, but yeah. Over there.
You were able to manage .env files?
What files?
.env. So, like for example, if you put environment variables.
Yes. Yeah. So if you supply the environment variables, Compose will open it up, or it will actually take it from your host machine. Like if you have the environment variables set on your host machine, be able to take it from there. But yeah, we have support for that.
Will it create a config map for it?
I'm not too sure, to be honest. Not about config map. I'll have to look into that. Okay.
Yeah, actually, like I have a few questions as well.
Yep.
A lot of people, like I saw, developers, they don't really kind of care about the security part. But when there's somebody else who's responsible to run the application in production, when you're using Docker, people putting everything in environment variables, and it's basically if you put the same way in Kubernetes, you can actually using kubectl, you can see all passwords and all environments. Mm-hmm. So, is there any way that Compose know that this is a secret or this is a service? Is there any way to kind of
there's an open issue for that. So I'll be talking in the last half of the presentation about how we get over those limitations of Docker Compose, because there are no secrets in Docker Compose at the moment.
Yeah, and then the one more question is, I don't.
Yep.
I'm gonna get T-shirt as well, or?
Oh yeah.
No.
This was at the Seattle Summit, so.
So yeah, if you basically have service, you have, let's say, 4 ways to you can have a node port, you can have load balancer, you can have Ingress. Is any way you can actually specify in the compose file that is going to be transferred, or how? Is it?
Yes. So you know how I talked about that part that I'm going to talk about later on the YAML file? It's that. So basically, you're going to get over some Docker Compose limitations, because not everything maps from Docker Compose to Kubernetes. You supply it with a label. So you could say node port, cluster IP, Ingress support as well. So you're actually able to specify a domain, and Compose will create Ingress. Yeah.
Okay.
So.
For example, like some people are still running in 1.5, 1.4.
Yeah.
Some people running in 1.6. Some like 1.7 already.
Mm.
How you would be able to tell to Docker Compose to create specific manifest for specific version?
We are out with that. So right now, we only support 1.5, 1.6, and 1.7. 1.4, like, basically, you just need deployments and services. We have support for daemon set, and we're adding support for, like, stateful sets and jobs and such. But basically, if you've used an app like KOps and they have that compatibility matrix, we're adding one of those, because basically, it's getting to the point where it's all Kubernetes community is pretty fractured of what version you're running. So, but eventually, like we'll eventually have like specific versions you could convert to.
So,
okay.
So there is Docker Compose, but you never mentioned anything about Docker Stack. Will that actually be supported?
This isn't in my slides, but basically we removed that because there wasn't much traction going on. Basically, they have an open issue for Docker on the Moby repo, whatever. So basically, they have an open issue that no one's talked in since 2016 about Docker Stack, because distributed application bundles are still in experimental. So we ended up removing the support because no one was using it. But yeah, like I don't know if that answers your question. Like, yeah, you're using it. Okay. All right, got one person.
One question. Why do you need another tool and not make kubectl, for example, to know how to process a Docker Compose file and with one tool and not another one?
So you mean like
3 plus 1 here?
Yeah. So you mean like implementing Docker Compose into kubectl? We did that for I'm at Red Hat, so we did that with OpenShift. Funny enough. And in OC, and we actually had like OC import, I think import file like Docker like Compose or something like that. We ended up splitting that out and taking that code, and we realized, this company called Skipbox is working on Kcompose. So we ended up taking the code from there and implementing it to Kcompose, and then putting it through the Kubernetes Incubator. And then now we just graduated the Kubernetes Incubator. So instead of having it in kubectl, we actually have it as an own separate project within the Kubernetes community. Basically, too much code to handle in one like binary.
Yeah, I think actually that's could be the reason, because they're trying to remove all extra stuff from Kubernetes because that can be added easily, because when you do testing, there's so many features, and if something is failing, there's going to be bad reports and stuff like that. So they want to remove something like out of the code. They did with the networking, we have CNI, we did it with the storage, we have, we did it with CRI. So they're trying to remove all these extra components to test so that the Kubernetes itself can be released faster. But I agree with you that it would be really nice to have it.
Yep. So yeah. Yeah. So the question was about like the plugin support as well. I think that was just added to 1.7, right? That was one of the new features, like kubectl plugin support. Yeah. So yeah, that's another way to like implement this. But You know what? Let's hold on to questions because a lot of these could be answered after. I'm going to be talking about this too. So let's switch back to the slides. Oh, all right, perfect. So why Compose? I think I answered a lot of this in the questions. So moving from Docker Compose to Kubernetes, dev environment to production, all the defaults. So we try and cover as many like niche and edge cases as possible. So we have like standard defaults of deploying to deployments and services. We have other parameters, so deploying to daemon sets, looking at stateful sets and stuff like that. But it gets you 95% of the way there. If like your application doesn't work with a Compose app, like we understand, just do compose convert and see what parts you could fill in, see what your application actually needs. Like I'll go over this with volumes because we have a lot of troubles with volumes too, because it's going from like mapping your host's volume to Kubernetes, which is like persistent volume claim. Anyways, so main use cases, I already covered that. Basically making a proof of concept, using your Docker Compose environment, seeing how it'll run in Kubernetes, and simplifying Kubernetes deployments. Some people and some companies that we've talked to basically just use Docker Compose, and they don't even need to create their own Kubernetes artifacts because they just run Compose up, or they do Compose convert and then kubectl apply if they need to make any updates or they change their containers or whatever. So some of the limitations is that some concepts are not available. We only map to deployments and services. Of course, we have other CLI parameters. Jobs as well is the other one I didn't mention. Secrets and config maps cannot be defined yet, so we have an issue open for that. Volumes are very difficult. It's like people want to basically have all their HTML files on their host and like have it in the same folder or whatever. So when they run Docker Compose up, so mapping that to Kubernetes, like you have to have a persistent volume claim, and not all keys are convertible. We actually have a conversion chart, and something like 70% of the keys we can't even convert because there's no one-to-one between Docker Compose and Kubernetes. Like all the main ones are there, but it's all the small nitty-gritty ones. Like for example, CPU, like they go by percentage, while Kubernetes goes by I think like value, like some weird value for it per node. So how we basically hacked up Docker Compose to work with Kubernetes. Docker has a Compose implementation in Go called libcompose. We use that and kind of like hack around it. It's the implementation in Go, so you're able to do the same functionality as their Python implementation. So we use that to like parse Docker Compose YAML file. And we make a lot of assumptions as well. It was only until later when Swarm was introduced that Docker Compose changed. It gets really annoying when it's like Docker Compose 1 is so much different to Docker Compose 2. And then they had like 2.1 and 2.2 release, and I don't think anybody used that. Like it was like health checks and stuff like that. And then they had Docker Compose 3 because they wanted Docker Swarm support with it. And so they had the deploy key, so they moved everything around. Now they're working on Docker Compose like 3. They had 3.1 release, had 3.2, now they have 3.3, and now it's like split between Community Edition and like Enterprise Edition. So I wish everybody could just switch to Kubernetes and that's it. Another thing as well is that Kubernetes is designed for multi-node from day one. Docker Compose was for single node testing purposes. Even for like a small, like, I don't know, if you're doing consulting and you want to run some like small PHP application on a VPS, like it's for that use case. If you want to run production code scaling on like Cassandra or something like that, you use Kubernetes.
Sorry, back to the version 2 and version 3.
Yeah.
Is there any way we need to specify to Compose which version of Compose file we're using, or it's automatic?
Automatic. So we actually added Docker Compose version 3 support in our 1.0 release. So it'll map directly. We're adding deploy key support. So under deploy, you could say replicas, and then you could say like CPU share and stuff like that. So
which one working better?
Version 2. Version 2. Version 3. we're developing it more and more. It's like we've dropped support actually for minor versions because Docker moves so freaking fast, and they don't know what they want to do with Docker Compose. So, anyways, let's move on. So basically, for volumes, that little line there converts to all of this. So we hack it up to try and get the most standard defaults. So for here, you have we have like a default storage of 100 megabytes, and then basically scaling from there. So just like pretty much standard defaults for mapping to Kubernetes. That's one of the ways that we convert it. This is very hacked up, and unfortunately, there's nothing we could do about it. But I'll show you how we fix that. So we use labels as well for things that we can't map. So we have Compose service type, node port. So you could either put node port, cluster IP, or load balancer if you're running on the cloud. For my example, I'm just going to use node port. Like in the demo, I use node port because I'm just running in MiniCube. And this creates the Ingress as well. So basically, for stuff that we can't map or we don't have in Docker Compose, we do it through labels. These are the only two labels that we have. Another thing as well is the service type. I just talked about this. So basically, it maps from that node port to there. Same with ingresses. Map the domain, and we create an ingress. Same with expose. Map the domain. We create the ingress in Kubernetes. We can only do so much. Like as a maintainer / developer working on Compose, there's only so much you could do. Like it gets to the point where you're okay. Like what are some other alternatives? And it's called Kedge. So another name with K in the front. So basically, Kedge simplifies Kubernetes artifacts. It's basically the Docker Compose version to Kubernetes artifacts, but better, I hope. So it's a simple way to just define concise applications, define only what you need, and the CLI tool will fill in the rest. It will basically find all the good defaults with deployments and services. It's simple for developers, but what better way to show you? So basically, containers, we have this standard YAML file. At the top, we have the name. We have containers, which basically maps to deployment, and then services, which of course maps to service. So we take this super simple YAML file, and we generate all of this. So I'll save questions for later, because I know this is a lot to take in right now. And a more elaborate example. Like now it starts getting crazy. Most likely can't read it from here, but I'll show you in a bit. Basically, this is a database, MySQL, actually running MariaDB, same thing. Depends who you ask. So we have the database here, and then we have web with all these environment variables. Please don't use WordPress as your password and username. And we're able to deploy this to Kubernetes to generate all these artifacts without having to worry about it. Basically simplifying the development process and not having to worry about, okay, spec, containers, environments. Just have this nice, simple YAML file. Okay, so you essentially do Kedge, create database and web, and off you go. So another demo, praise the demo god, so hopefully this works. All right, so there we go. Hopefully this is big enough. Now, keep in mind, this is so new, we don't even have a release yet. I'm serious. Like, we have a bunch of things we need to fix before we do the release. We have this nice little demo, it works and everything, but even for mapping, communicating to Kubernetes. Compose, we use the API. Now, like we use the Go client and everything, and for this we just map using kubectl at the moment. But this is so new. Like, download, test it out. Please open an issue, or don't give me more work. I like that too. So basic kubectl get pods. Luckily I have nothing running. So I'll do Kedge. Oh, basic. First off, I'll show you the first example. So CentOS, using Apache. If we run this, just like kubectl. So catch create, and off it goes. Honestly, I'm not gonna wait for this to come up, but basically enter MiniCube service. I think it's HTTPD, and you're able to access it. So, all right, this is still not up yet. It's exact same as kubectl. Taking this super simple YAML file, which defaults to deployment and services, and create it now. Oh. I think that's a bug. All right, so HTTPD. There we go. All right, perfect. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So same as with this example too. I'm not going to run this because I don't want to wait for the other one to be deleted. Exact same thing. kubectl creates -f and adding everything there. Okay, so let's move on. I don't know how much time I have left. Okay. So collaborating with the Kubernetes community. This isn't. There we go. So this is our nice little table. We go, here's Docker Compose. There's a lot of blanks. Compose and then Kedge. So to answer your questions about secrets and everything, in Kedge, we're adding support for that. There's actually an open PR, and I think I reviewed it yesterday. But basically, we're filling in what we can convert from Docker Compose to Compose and then to Kedge. So for example, probes, they were added as health checks in Docker Compose in version 2.1 and 3. I think 2.1. And then Compose, we have an open issue for that. And then, of course, we define it in Kedge. Same as for secrets. We have the open PR, but of course, you can't define any secrets in Docker Compose yet. Yeah. And if you want to check it out, we just reached 1.0, like I said before, and we just graduated. There should be a Kompose blog post coming out soon. Of course, the Kubernetes blog people were busy with 1.7, but I think you'll see it about next week. We have our websites and GitHub as well. We have a lot of stars on this one, so if you could go on that one and give a lot of stars, that'd be great. But just check it out. Like, seriously, instead of having to write all these Kubernetes artifacts, nice, simple, concise file that defaults to all these other deployments. We communicate a lot in SIGApps, and we're also in Slack too. Okay, that's my presentation.
Nice for the great demos. I think we should still do the round of questions, right?
Yeah. Are there any questions?
Like I still have a question actually.
Oh, perfect.
So I mean, what we're seeing right now, as you said, a lot of developers using Docker Compose because they not necessarily took training about Kubernetes. They don't know about it, but like people have been using Docker for like 3 years now, and they have it on their machines, like on MacBooks, whatever. So like Kedge is not. You have to just write there, and then how are you going to test with the Kedge? Like you have to migrate it, and then
yeah, there's no like with Compose, like testing your dev environment with Docker Compose, and of course converting it to Kubernetes. This is more for deploying straight to Kubernetes. But yeah, like it's basically testing on MiniCube, I guess, as your development environment. But even you were talking about MiniCube and everything earlier. Like using that as a development environment is not like there's some missing features and stuff like that when it first came out. So now it's better. But yeah, like you'll have to test it directly to Kubernetes cluster.
Okay.
Yep.
Two questions, I think. One, why can't you just merge between two tools? And another question, why do you introduce another YAML format instead of just using the same Kubernetes one, but with lesser configuration options, which you just fill in automatically? So it will spare from the developer another learning curve, and it also will prevent different developers using different tools to miss to find actually a common language, something like that. Because what I'm seeing in the community, a lot of new tools are popping up every morning, and if you will try to actually follow everyone, you'll try to follow. Will be using anything.
Yeah, that is a very good question. Like the second question, in regards to like if anybody's ever seen the XKCD comic, there's one which talks about like there's 14 different standards, and like another standard has come up. Now there's like 15. It's the exact same thing with Kedge. Like, what's the point of using Kedge when you could just focus your time on learning all those Kubernetes artifacts? And unfortunately, I don't really have an answer for that because, like you said, the community every like month a new tool comes up. We have Kedge, which is what we like, which we use to fill in the whole deploying little apps and stuff like that on Kubernetes. Then there's also like KSONet, which is like I forgot what it's called. It's like the JSON. Pardon? Yeah. Using JSON and having like everything automatically fill in and magically create all these Kubernetes artifacts. But as well, it's like learning another format to learn another format to finally use Kubernetes. And then what was your first question in regards to versioning? Mm-hmm.
If you're controlling Compose, just add support for how do you say a small version of the Kubernetes language, and so in the long run it will make the community only beneficial because every developer will talk the same language. Every developer eventually understand what format of Kubernetes YAML is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, your question was like, what's the point of using?
Yes.
Like, basically, what's like why just like stick to Compose and that's it.
Yes.
Why learn all like
yes.
Kedge as well? Basically, the way that we see it is that we hope, like, I don't know if this is being recorded. We hope that Docker Compose eventually kind of like dies out.
There is no problem with
right?
evolution.
Yeah.
Evolution eventually will sort things out. There's no problem with it. But
exactly.
all the species that are left evolving to the next stage will be suffering from the ones that died out or what.
Yeah. Like basically the way we see it is like convert everything to Kubernetes, use Kubernetes, but get away from Docker Compose, and then start using Kedge. But like we don't know where Kedge is going. We don't even know. We don't even have our first release, and we got some feedback from the community, from like Brian Grant and like a few other of the core Kubernetes maintainers, and that basically said, "Good job, but come back to us in a few months when you have a bunch of people using it and you get a bunch of feedback." Like we don't see Kedge ever like fully replacing artifacts. It's just getting people on board to use it, being like, okay, cool, this is the guestbook app, use it, launch it, learn a little bit of this, but really just move to Kubernetes artifacts, because like then we have like 3 different standards for launching one thing. Yeah.
So if this is your main agenda to do it, because
Yeah.
I think at least you can use the language that Kubernetes already using, but in a lesser amount. So once developers will understand small footprint of the language, they will be easier for them to move for their full one.
Yeah, exactly. So like what you just said is basically having a simple tool like this and migrating people to actually learn Kubernetes. Because like, to be honest, it's the first time I started learning it is this big massive artifact file. It's really confusing. Like under spec, like why do we need it under spec when we could just remove that key and have everything under the next key? Like, yeah.
We have one more question here.
You mentioned stateful sets weren't supported yet, but they're on the way. Do you have like a ETA on that?
So basically, funny enough, I'm assigned to that issue, and I'm trying to write code kill two birds with one stone, write it for Kedge, be able to add it to Kompose right after. But even vice versa, the other way around. ETA, I'm actually working on it this sprint, if anybody's worked Agile. So next 3 weeks, and you'll see something. Yep.
So you said that you're expecting or hoping Kompose to die at some point.
Yeah.
For the average developer who's just wanting to cut some code and have a representative environment where they can just edit and reload their page, do you have any suggestions on where they might look for a future-proof solution?
Of Kubernetes and MiniCube, but even then, it's a catch-22. It's what's the point of using Kubernetes and MiniCube when Kubernetes is hella hard to learn at first, and when you could just use Docker Compose, and that's where Kedge fills in. That's exactly we saw this niche, and we're okay, all the project managers are okay, please create something here because it's brand new, no one else has thought of it before, but then again, we don't know where it's going. So, but yeah, there's no other alternatives. You're right. There's Docker Compose, bringing up all your containers, which is great. But yeah, we'll see from there. Yep.
All right, I think enough for questions. So yeah, I just want to add 2 cents. So there's, we have an Incubator project where there's a lot of projects like that, and Kubernetes, and the hardest part is people heard something and they're trying to use, but they don't know the state. So these talks kind of help all developers to understand current state. We also have a Helm project that was Incubator, now graduated. So Helm allows you to, run different sets. Basically, you can create a chart with, say, chart for the production, chart for, just by modifying the variables, you can, create multiple different versions of your application. There is another tool that is right now in Incubator called Draft. So this is Days basically Microsoft, they created this tool so you can Google it and check. So Draft allows you to run, for the developer, connect to the Kubernetes cluster and run your test all the time. Just you modify the code and you can directly test it, so you don't have to do the git commit every time to test your application. So I think we should be good now. Pizza is still on the way, so we decided to have another demo for GKE. You guys okay with that? Okay, cool. So thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.